Hello everyone, welcome to the JK Academy. This channel aims to talk about architecture and urban design in the most simplest way. So if you're interested, please subscribe to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about capitalism and the commons. Here's the content of today's lecture. It's divided into capitalism and commons. The lecture on capitalism will be based on this book, The Capital, written by Karl Marx. This was published in 1867, and when you talk about Karl Marx, I think many people will associate him with communism because he wrote a book on Manifesto of the Communist Party, which was published in 1848. However, I think that his biggest contribution is not really about the book on the Communist Party, but actually on this book on the Capital, where he spent almost his life trying to investigate and to analyze what was the cause of this capitalism. And then in this book, he tries to actually clarify the mechanism behind the capitalist system. The volume 2 and 3, he already passed away when this was published. Actually, it was written by Engels. So, but it's based on the notebook written by Marx. So to begin with, I want to first explain in the most simplest way how did capitalism ever started. So this diagram shows a very, very simple scheme of the mechanism behind all that, like the thinking, how capitalism really emerged. So let's imagine that you have a field of grass, it's a pasture land, and then you have sheep. And these sheep, usually people will obtain material from them, which is wool. And from wool, you can actually produce products, which are like sweaters and socks and so on. Our clothing, our attire is can come from this sheep. And so this, if you sell it, it becomes money. And therefore what happened is that comes the capitalist, he tries to fence up the land, and then he tries to own the land and then also the sheep. So this is actually the very beginning of how capitalism started. So this, the key concept here is privatization of land and also privatization of anything that will produce something, produce a product in the end. So in this case is sheep. She can produce wool, and then wool can become a product which can be like sweaters and socks and so on. And this is the capitalist, and then he's owning all of these things. Therefore, we can understand that probably many people think that capitalism is something that has only been for a few centuries. However, it has been going on for millennia. And during the ancient time, it just happened that people try to classify in a different way or express in a different way. But actually, ever since a long time ago, capitalism thinking has already started. So, for example, in the ancient period, you have aristocracy, you have knights and slaves. And the important thing is to separate the dominant class and then the working class. So the dominant class in the ancient period, it could be the aristocrats, and then the working class, they could be the slaves. And during the medieval time, you have the feudalism, you have the peasants. The dominant class in this case will be the feudal lord, and then the working class will be the peasants. And the capitalism that we are aware of today, you have the capitalists and you have the workers, and then in the dominant class is the bourgeois, and then the working class will be the proletarians. So these are some of the classification according to different period. But what Marx is saying, is that basically capitalism has already emerged since very, very long time ago. Ever since people started to fence up or enclose the land, it's already started. And then therefore, and then the only difference is the role of the dominant class and the working class. And apart from that, in terms of the mechanism, they are all capitalism. To summarize the implication behind this, or what does it imply, is that for the capitalist or the dominant class, it means the characteristic is that in terms of land, they are privately owning the land, and in terms of the material, so the example of the ship that I have mentioned, the material comes from the ship, and the capitalist, he will be owning these ships. And therefore, the manufacturing process, which is the process of the production, it's also privately owned. And then the product, of course, will be owned by the producer, which is the capitalist. So on the other hand, the working class, the workers, what do they have? Of course, they don't own anything. And then therefore, they are only left with labor as the only means of production that they have. So they would have to sell labor in order to live. And this diagram here, it shows the flow of the capitalism. And how to understand this diagram, you have this here is about the input, and then this part here is about the output. Okay. And then I'm going to explain one by one what it means. So the first part, the most important thing you need to understand in terms of the flow of the capitalism is, first of all, you have the input, which is here, and you have the output, which is here. Both of them, they are privately owned, of course, by the capitalist. The capitalist, he owns the land, also he owns the material, and then also he owns the manufacturer. And then he hires labor, the workers, and however the production that they have, which is the product here, they are all belonging to the capitalist. So by privately owning this input, he's automatically owning everything in the end. So this is one thing. The second thing, looking into the working class, here's the workers. As I mentioned in the previous slide, the workers, they don't own anything, and then therefore they will have to be selling their own skills, which is basically the labor. The third part is that once the product is being produced, then it goes through the market, and then you get increase because of the market, and then you get a net profit, and then this goes into the capitalist money. So this is a simple diagram to show the flow of the capitalism. In the book of Capitalism by Marx, the biggest contribution that he made is probably identifying this concept of surplus value and exploitation of labor. So this is probably the key word for you to understand what is capitalism. So I'm going to explain again in detail what this means. So this is the kind of like the general flow or the general mechanism to explain about these two, which is actually focusing on this part of the previous diagram. However, I'm going to zoom in to specifically focus on some aspects to explain. So first of all, this is the flow until the product is being produced. So you have the workers provide labor, and they work in a factory, and then they are going to produce using the material and then using the machine in order to produce a product. You need to understand that this part here and this part, there is something that is different. This is a constant capital. So a material and machine is something that you need constantly, and then it's a fixed price. So this one you cannot change. So therefore it is a constant capital. Here is a variable capital. And then this is why this concept of surplus value and exploitation of labor will appear. So try to understand that this is a variable capital, therefore it's changeable. It will change. To explain this a little bit more in detail, I'm going to focus on a specific example. Let's say we are producing a sweater, and to produce a sweater it requires this amount of money to produce this. And then, so as I say, this is a constant capital, and so this is something that is fixed. The net profit is obtainable through the market, so this is something different from the net profit. So now zooming into this part. So as I said, there is a constant variable capital, which is there's a constant capital in order to produce a product. So technically, this should go to the worker, because they're the workers, they're selling their labor to produce this, and then therefore they have the right actually to obtain this amount of wage. However, the trick is that in between there is another process whereby this amount of money has been split into wage and surplus. Okay. So this is the dark side of this the variable capital, because it's changeable, it's variables. Therefore, the capitalist can adjust this price. So if the capitalist, he was a nice person, probably he will give most of this as a wage. However, a really nasty capitalist, he could give just a small amount of wage to the workers, and then all the surplus value, the remains, will actually go to the capitalist. So this is different from the net profit, but it is a value that the capitalist is gaining. So the capitalist profit can be obtained actually by adjusting this variable capital, and then the labor is the same. However, if you downgrade or if you give little wage to the workers, then you will have more surplus to the capitalist. So this action here is called the exploitation of labor. So this is the surplus value. And then what does the capitalist do with this surplus value? Okay, there is a reason why he wants to do this. So the surplus value, it will go to invest on the machine. So using the surplus value, typically the capitalist would invest on a new machine to compete against the market competition. So the capitalist, he has a competitor, another capitalist, and then they are competing from each other, because this is how market profit or the net profit is being decided. The more production you have, so if you upgrade your machinery, maybe you can produce even more products. So the production will go up, and then therefore the wealth of capitalists will also increase as well. And so if he's really successful, then the capitalist, he can push his strata upwards. So this is actually the main reason why the capitalist is actually exploiting labor in order to gain this surplus value, and for him to upgrade himself on the machine, and then with this he's able to actually increase the production, and then therefore his wealth will go up. So the pushing his strata upwards, it might mean that he might have a even bigger manufacturer, or he can have different things going on at the same time. So he can do many other projects besides just producing the sweater. He can be producing other things as well, and then he can expand his business even more, and then that would eventually make him even wealthier. So that is the concept behind the surplus value. So then what happens to the worker? The worker, of course, they don't have anything but himself selling his labor. And so with this little wage that they are getting, and usually these workers, they don't know the mechanism behind this surplus value. So they think that they're just getting the appropriate amount of wage. However, by doing this, because of the exploitation of labor, the workers, they are just considered like a machine on a machine process. They are just being part of the machine, and then they are losing their identity, and then therefore it kind of leads to the loss of identity, and then therefore a loss of culture in the end. So the workers, they only have labor as a means of production, so therefore they can never push their strata up. So the difference here, you can understand that by privately owning something, you can actually do a lot of things in order to push your strata upwards, and you become even more wealthier. However, if you don't own anything, if you don't have anything that is private, and the only thing that you have yourself as means of production is you yourself in terms of skill and also in terms of labor, and then that means that you will always be stuck in your own strata, and then you can never push upwards. So this is the dark side of the capitalism, and it happened often during the this loss of identity. Actually was quite critical during the period of the Industrial Revolution during the 19th century. Many people, if you see a lot of the images during those periods, you understand that people were really being treated like a machine, part of the machine, and then people were just making parts within the big factory, so they may not know exactly what they are producing. And then, so repeating this every day, they are starting to, of course, becomes tired, but then in the end they are losing their identity, and then that would eventually lead to a loss of culture. So going back to this political system of production, so you had different ways to express the capitalism during different periods. So what is the in-between that is making this differentiation is basically related to the surplus value that has been invested on the machinery, is this technology and innovation. So in between, you have this innovation, technology and innovation, input of this. So in this period, metal and manufacturing was one of these technological innovation that happened. And then in between medieval and capitalism, something of today, the mechanization was one of these innovation that happened. So the investment on the machinery actually also improves the technology, and then also it gives innovation. And then therefore, as time passes by, you have a different capitalism character behind the scene. So just to summarize the first part on the capitalism, the things that we need to understand is the exploitation of labor is actually creating this loss of identity.